Ayanna Mathis's first novel, The 12 Tribes of Hattie, was a New York Times bestseller, second selection for Oprah's Book Club 2.0, a 2013 New York Times notable book, NPR Best Book of 2013, and was longlisted for the Dublin Literary Award. Miss Mathis received her MFA at the Iowa Writers' Workshop and went on to become the first African-American woman to serve as an assistant professor in that program. She currently teaches at Hunter College's MFA program. Her new novel, The Unsettled, is set in turbulent 1980s Philadelphia and the small town of Bonaparte, Alabama. This evening, she'll be joined in conversation with Asali Solomon, an award-winning novelist and the Bertrand K. Wilbur Chair in the Humanities at Haverford, where she is a professor of English and director of creative writing. Please welcome our guest to the Free Library.
Hi. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so happy to see such faces. Oh, there's Akiba. And there's my cousin and my aunt. And a lot of other people. I'm going to stop being weird now. So what we figured we'd do is I was going to read a little bit. Not too long. Don't feel dread in your hearts. And then Asali and I are going to talk, and then hopefully y'all will ask some questions. And that's what we're going to do. Okay, so the first part of the novel, I'm going to read from each part of the novel. It's in two parts. The first part of the novel is set in a homeless shelter where two of the main characters, one's named Ava, the other one's name is Toussaint, her son, are living. And then in the second part of the novel, these same two people, they go to, let's call it a group with utopic aspirations. So for now, I'm going to read from a section that takes place in the shelter. This chapter is called Family Day. "Honey," Ava said, sitting up in bed, wild-eyed. "Quick, get dressed." It was already 10:30. Toussaint sat cross-legged on his bed across from his mother. "Today is Labor Day," he said. Ava's hair was smashed in on one side, but here they call it Family Day. There's a sign in the hallway. Toussaint didn't like it when she slept late. It reminded him of the mornings after she and Abemi had one of their fights back in New Jersey. That's the man that Ava was married to. Those mornings he spent sitting on the floor by the bed, watching his mother curled on her side as the hours ticked by. 11, noon, 1. Toussaint had gone to the cafeteria while Ava slept. 2 weeks at Glen Avenue, and this was the first time he'd gone anywhere alone. He had rehearsed the routine in his mind. Take the tray from the stack, just like at school. Take the fork, tell the lady what you want, hold the tray steady, sit. Take the tray, But the cafeteria was heaving with people. Red sweatpants and pink foam curlers, hard rollers, black tracksuit, bright green slippers, ashy heels, mother and daughter, gold earrings, edges pressed, duck pajamas, toothpaste smudge on a chin. The lady at the counter asked him if he wanted toast, but when he opened his mouth, he couldn't form the words. He sat in a corner, choking down the rubbery eggs, but at least he didn't cry. He didn't run away either. "There's barbecue," he told his mother now. She had gotten out of bed at last. "They were talking about it in the cafeteria," he added when she didn't answer. "You went to the cafeteria by yourself?" she asked. After he'd finished his eggs, he smuggled out a piece of toast and a banana to save his mother the trip when she woke up. He pointed at the little bundle sitting on the desk. "Nobody said anything," he said. Toussaint peered out into the hallway as Ava brushed past him on her way to the bathroom. Family Day had got itself up and running. New faces in the corridor, most of them smiling. Music playing. Men's voices boomed out of the propped open doors of the rooms. Kids squealed at the fathers and uncles and older brothers who'd come to see them. Someone set up a boom box in the playground and propped the door open so the little kids wouldn't get their fingers smashed in the metal door frame. A teensy, pot-bellied brown girl in an orange shirt was laughing her head off and offering everybody the drooly leftovers of her icy pop. Toussaint smiled too. Ugh, what confusion, Ava said when she returned to their room a few minutes later. These people are a mess. Toussaint thought it was all a little bit joyful, and it was just that his mother couldn't see it. I think it's fun, he said. Oh, honey, Ava replied, shaking her head. There's no fun here. Toussaint opened the long windows. He sat cross-legged on the top of the desk. If he held his head at the right angle, he could see the edge of the AMP parking lot across the street. He stared at the ankles of the people milling on the trampled grass just outside. They're barbecuing, he said. The hot dog hamburger smell hung in the air. Earth, Wind, and Fire played on the radio in the playground. Boogie on down, Toussaint mouthed. Then just like that, he had memoried himself all the way back to New Jersey. He could taste the spicy gumbo at his friend Paul's house and the milk he drank after, silky, creamy, and cooling his mouth. Paul's mother always had a pot of something good bubbling on the stove. Call me Jilly, she said the first time they met. No miss, just Jilly. Jilly knew every card game there was. You don't know how to play nothing? Not even gin rummy? She'd asked. They're holy rollers, her son Paul had explained. He hadn't meant anything by it. He'd never been to church, not one time. He asked if he could come with Toussaint some Sunday, just so he could see what it was like. Jilly taught Toussaint to play blackjack. Hopefully Jesus won't get mad, she said, and winked. She was always laughing, and it sounded just like the telephone ringing, bells, bells, bells. And she was always in a slip when he and Paul got there after school, and she smelled like sweet candy, like if you could make candy out of flowers. Her hair was in pin curls, and she walked from stirring the kitchen pots to changing the records in the living room, back and forth with the mascara wand in her hand. At some point late in the afternoon, she put on a dress and heels and click-clacked out the door. See you later, babies, she called on her way out. Jilly was just like a movie. When she was gone, Paul took control of the turntable. They had the whole world to themselves. You know Sylvester? Paul asked. You know Martha Wash? He was 3 years older. He gave Toussaint an education. They played songs 10 times, 15 times, till they knew every word, every break in the beat. The house smelled of Jilly's cooking. The setting sun cut the living room into gold and shadow. Music thumped in the floors. Family room was loud as if it was happening right in their very room. Toussaint wondered if people were dancing out in the hallways. You can do the hustle to just about anything, Jilly had once said. Toussaint didn't know if his mother could do the hustle. He thought she used to know. Before Obey she probably knew. Maybe she had done the hustle with his father, but Toussaint couldn't picture Cass dancing, like Magneto wouldn't dance. And glide like a 747 and lose yourself, he sang under his breath. Ava sat herself down at the desk with one of those stupid coloring books they'd given him. His coloring books. Not that he wanted them, but still. What are you doing with that? He asked. Ugh, these gnats, she said, waving her hand around. There were only gnats because she hadn't eaten the banana he'd given her that morning. Close that window, honey. It's just letting bugs in. But Ava didn't reply. She was in one of her moods. She was like a big, tall mountain with clouds so thick around it you couldn't see the top half. It was cold up there behind those clouds. On a real mountain, that is, which Toussaint knew from geography class. If you tried to climb one, you'd have felt like you were the only person on earth. You'd have felt so lonely you could die. I'll stop there, and then I'm going to read something different than I thought. I think I'll read the other part of this novel. We've read Philadelphia. The other part of this novel takes place in a mythical place called Bonaparte in Alabama. And the beginning, it's such an important town in the life of this book that I thought it needed to have a myth, like an origin myth to start it out. So I'm gonna read you a couple of pages of its origin myth. It is in another of the narrator's voices. Her name is Duchess. In the beginning was the Alabama River, sunrise, dusk, starling flight. Gators, sunfish, Spanish moss, live oak, mountain lion, lark, muskogee, Alabama Choctaw. Bonaparte wasn't yet Bonaparte because all the niggers were still in Africa, not knowing they were going to become niggers. No Huntress or Isabella full of Africans sold to Quakers, no Clotilda sunk off the coast of Mobile, all the white folk still up in their cold places fighting each other. Ooh, they sure was coming though, and when they did. They wanted to conquer death and time. They came down on the world like the rain came down on Noah. They wanted to be the rain and Noah and God too. What they don't know is God helps people invent the God they deserve. White folks have Zeus, popes, dollars, big motherfuckers that suck the bones of tender things. Scared all the real gods into hiding with their cannon fire, burning forests, whales trailing blood under all the oceans, big teeth chomping up all the Indians, every wood and every plain, ships filthied the waters with our mothers sealed below the decks. Topside, the sails clapped, and the wind blew the crew's hair and whipped their lice into the foaming water. Their souls went too. Damnation haunts their generations. Bonaparte is how the white people called this place on the banks of the Alabama River. It was green and greener, even after they got some bodies to fell the trees. Some bodies planted cotton, planted sorghum, more cotton. Them motherfuckers didn't know what they was doing. Could have asked the Muskogee, but they drove them like dogs to Oklahoma. Could have asked the niggers, but you know. The earth turned on them, told you they was cursed, and sent plagues of insects. We had our kitchen gardens. We had our chitlins and pig feet. We knew how to eat around little bones. Floods came. God said, float. Niggers made rafts out of wood. First master drowned, washed up, covered with leashes. Second master, smallpox. Third, tuberculosis. Four master's sons all died on the same full moon night. Shit, them spirits don't play. Our mothers neither. Massa so shook up he came down to the cabins, his thing softened in his pants for once. What happened to my sons, he wants to know. Should have put blood on your door, old Rhea said. He gave her the bit, sure. But 3 weeks later, he was dead too. Heartbreak, you reckon. After that, there was a lull in masters. The story goes that old Rhea took to standing at the river's edge, looking across the water. One's coming, she'd say, every decade or so. Then she turned her back and walked into the woods. Wouldn't nobody see her until that new master grew a goiter on his throat and strangled or got burnt up in a slave cabin, the brown girl in it with him outside, warming her naked self by the flames. The war came and went. Evidently, we all got freed, but nobody in Bonaparte heard about it till long after that, because by then, wouldn't no white folks blight our shorelines or our woods or our fields. Bonaparte farmed. People made shiny-eyed babies with minds quick as rabbit traps. Old Rhea kept watch on the shore. One day, who could say how many decades had passed, one day old Rhea said, "One's coming." White folks troop up the road, big eyes staring because they never saw the like. Our men with no yesser in their mouth, the women looking 'em straight in the eye. Fields neat as ironed handkerchiefs, big fat cows everywhere. The white men say they got new plans for a new time. New time, says Bonaparte. 1936, they say. The plans say the government decided to give Bonaparte to the people, even though the people already had it. Rhea said, let 'em, but don't tell 'em nothing. So it went. They did their surveys and drew up their deeds. Everybody signed. When it was done, Bonaparte gathered by the river at dusk. Rhea said, everything born on this land, everlasting knows by name. Anything come for us, God rise against it. Through us, we are God's vengeance and blessing. Then Rhea, she was something old by then, raised her arms up to the woods, and up come a flock of starlings swelling the sky. They're still there, every night, a wave of surging black across the twilight. You should see 'em. Oh, you really should. Stop there.
Thank you. Okay, I was also testing the mic.
I know it. You're welcome.
Thank you. But you were saying that you hadn't really figured out the sections to read, but it seemed like you'd read those a lot. I mean, there was even singing.
I think it's from writing those sections, right? Like the singing part, you know, because
Yeah.
I could always hear him. You know, I guess he's like 11 at that point. I could always hear him in my mind, like mouthing these songs to himself because mom won't let him go outside.
Yeah, right. Okay, now I get to ask questions. So what was the beginning of this for you? It has so much in it, right? So I'm just wondering, like, what's the kernel that it forms around?
I think too. I sort of always knew. Well, let me backtrack. I mean, I was working on it for 8 years, almost 10 probably actually. But 2 of them I don't count because it was kind of a different. Sort of a different book at that point.
Yeah.
But when I kind of got to the point where I was like, okay, I think that this is what this book is, I knew always sort of how it would end. So I'm not going to tell you how it would end because spoiler alert, obviously. But I knew that it had something to do with Move, even though it is not Move. So I knew that kind of. And then I also knew, because I got really lucky, that voice, the last voice that I read, the sort of origin myth, Duchess is that character's name, she came really early on too. Even though I didn't really know where she belonged, but there was this voice of this like itinerant blues singer who I knew wasn't anymore and was probably in her 70s and lived in some sort of like rural place that had been an important place. And I didn't know what her storyline was or kind of what her deal was really, but I knew that the thing had to kind of form around her.
Mm-hmm. But it's interesting because that takes place in Alabama, right? Whereas I'd say most of the action takes place in Philadelphia, right? What did you want to do by putting those places in connection? I mean, it like revisits your earlier novel in terms of thinking about like the Great Migration, but like, I don't know, talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there were a couple of things. I mean, so I mentioned that without too many spoilers, in the second half of the novel, Ava and her son kind of gravitate toward this this group that is a black, very political group that is like mostly my imagination, but also like a little bit Black Panthers, a little bit Weather Underground, a little bit maybe sort of Move in the sense that they compost and things, but very interested in Black freedom and in autonomy and in forming a kind of utopic community. In which they get to sort of like live outside of the norms of society, you know, whatever those are, right? And also the place that Duchess lives in, where Ava came from, was a place like that. That's the origin myth that I read, and that place existed for a very long time, over 100 years before. When the novel opens and we meet it, there are literally 5 old people left in this place trying to kind of hold on to it. And so I wanted them. I think of Bonaparte as a real place and also kind of a spiritual homeland. And I also wanted, as I wrote in, I realized that I was really interested in conversations about communities that attempt to create something that is like autonomy and something that is like freedom, and that I was also interested in the violence, various sorts of violence that those kinds of communities might encounter. And so I wanted these places to be in conversation with each other. And I also wanted one to be kind of a dark mirror of the other, which I think is sort of what Philadelphia is, like those Philadelphia sections, the group there is called ARC. And I think that ARC is formed by someone who is right about a whole lot of things, but has some kind of messed up intentions and some really messed up methods. And so in the ways in which Bonaparte thrives when it did, you know, and was a place of like of safety and a haven and all these kinds of wonderful things, ARC is much less that kind of place. So I wanted a lot of mirroring, and I think that probably happens a lot in the book, like particularly about those 2 places. But I think in other ways too, like I was making a joke to a friend of mine. I was like, I think I basically just wrote the same book twice, like, but you know what I mean? Like set in different places with like different circumstances. But
Yeah. So what did you learn writing this book?
I mean, I don't even know where to begin. I I learned, I've always had this theory, sometimes people will say, when people say to you, like, well, you've probably answered a big question with this book, or like, what are your and what I discovered, which I suspected and used to say to my students before I think I really was sure, was that I don't think that I have written a book that kind of answers any questions, but rather just explores a lot of questions. And I think in the long trajectory of getting this book written, I think that I thought for a while that I could answer some questions. And then what I realized is that wasn't my job. And then I couldn't do any, like I didn't have any of the answers to any of these questions. And so that what I had to do was to ask the best sorts of questions and describe the world from which those questions would arise the best that I could. And that was a really big, that was an enormous writing lesson. And it was also an enormous lesson about just kind of being a thinking person and like trying to get through the world as it is now, in which it often seems that it is utterly impossible to have any sort of answer about anything, but that maybe what is possible is to record things and to keep asking questions and to keep trying to question better. So it was sort of a writing lesson and a life lesson.
I mean, it's interesting because I think like one of the most difficult things that any writer does is to write a second book.
It's horrible.
So like, what did you feel like you learned about yourself and writing in this process?
That I didn't know how to do it. I mean, seriously, it's like, you write your first book and you're like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I did that, And then I was like, all right, well, I don't want to be a one-hit wonder. I got to write a second book. I was like, I don't even know if I would want to write a second book. It's just pride.
Thinking about retiring.
Exactly.
Like, oh yeah, I already did that.
That's enough,
Right.
So, but it's impossible. I mean, sophomore novels are just a nightmare. They take forever. There's all the sort of pressures, I feel like if a novel was really successful and I got so lucky with Hattie, then there's all the pressures of that follow-up. If that hadn't been the case, there would still be all this pressure because then I would have been like, I've got to do better than the first time. No matter what, it's horrible.
Yeah. Right.
And takes and endless and interestingly enough, it's like you never, writing is such a private thing, right? Like it's such a quiet, private thing. And once you have a book out in the world, regardless of how that book is received, there are now eyes and voices and opinions and things that are in your mind and sort of in your spirit, and you have to kind of go through this process of getting rid of them in a certain way, or at least finding something to do with them so that you can get. I don't think you can never be a debut novelist again, right? Like you can never be writing your first novel, not knowing anything about the industry. You can never go back there.
Right.
But maybe you can find some. A mentor and very dear friend of mine said to me once when I was really struggling about this, and she said, and I think it's just wise about everything, not just second novels, but she said that in time I would grow accustomed to navigating the revised circumstances of my existence. And which is like amazing and utterly true and took a long time, but was what it took. Right?
Also just about getting old or something. Too.
Also, right? Exactly. Like, like the hips and all that. Same.
So who was your favorite character to write? And who gave you the worst time?
Duchess. Favorite, sorry.
Okay.
She was so distinct. She came early on. She was clear. I mean, I didn't know what to do with her,
right.
But the voice was just like clear.
Right.
And I got lucky because she was clear, but she was complicated, right? Like her mothering and her motherhood and her approach to motherhood is complicated. Her relationship to this place that she is now stewarding, I guess, that would be Bonaparte, is complicated. Her relationship to her daughter is incredibly complicated. Her relationship to her past is complicated. But she is brave and wisecracking and sort of doesn't generally want to admit those things about herself. So she was just a gift. The hardest character by far was Ava. By far. Ava so Ava is sort of you could call her the protagonist, but I don't know. I mean, I sort of think it's all three of them. So Ava is sort of that voice in the Philadelphia sections in the novel. And she was just so difficult. She didn't want to talk to me. I couldn't hear her voice. And when I did, I think I was like judging her, and then she would get mad and she didn't want to come around.
Why did you want to write her so much? Like, what did you want to do with a character who got on your nerves?
Because it needed her.
Yeah.
There needed to be this woman with this child who was trying to navigate a complicated but glorious past, who for whatever reasons, which I won't get into, but partly because she just has beef with her mom, refuses to return to that glorious past and is looking for something else. I seem to be very interested in motherhood and in mothers who, I was joking to a friend that I'm just going to keep writing novels about failed mothers. And they're not failed in the sense that they deeply love their children, but they are not, the ways in which they show that are not always recognizable, sometimes not to their children, most problematically, which I guess is kind of the same with Hattie theme. But anyway, so I knew that she needed to be there, and I knew that she was interesting if I could just like tune out the static and kind of hear her. Also difficult because the first half of the novel takes place in a homeless shelter. I mean, it's interspersed with these Bonaparte sections. And it was like she's depressed, she's having a hard time. And so there's, as it turns out, a pretty good deal happens, but it doesn't seem like much to me for a long time. It felt like I just had to write in stasis, like this woman's just kind of wandering around this shelter being depressed. And I didn't know how to animate that. I was like, well, this is just going to be the same day. It's just Groundhog Day, but like really depressing because it's in a homeless shelter. You know what I mean? So it's like, what am I to do with this? So that also was really hard with her.
Yeah. So I saw in your bio that you're a student at Union Theological.
I am.
Is that true?
I am.
And I've been reading your essays in the Times about faith. Talk about the decision to use everlasting in place of God for overwhelmingly the book. I think there's like 2 mentions of actual like God, right?
So there are many reasons. So one of the reasons is that I didn't want to use gender pronouns with God, and and everlasting as a term kind of came very organically one day when I was working on it. And I think maybe I had been using God for a while, but then had been running into some very thorny, ugly syntactical problems, because if I want to refer to God but I don't want to say he, then the sort of theological thing currently would be to say instead of saying him would be like God or God's self, which I think is very beautiful, but like saying that over and over again in a novel does not work. So it was like, okay, if I'm not using gender pronouns, if I'm not, then what could I do? There's got to be some way around that. And of course, the pronoun thing is just the tip of the iceberg, right? Because I don't believe in, and nor do I think that these people, particularly in the Bonaparte sections, I don't think they believe in a gendered God. Like, I don't think they believe in a God that is a he. I think they believe in a God that is like a little bit Christian and a little bit like, in the river and in the plants and in the trees. And that God is sort of an amalgam. And so also God, in the way that we might think of it, would evoke immediately like a Christianity that is super recognizable. Yeah. And while that is part of their faith system, it's also something else. Right. So I needed another term for the way that they would think about God, which would be this omnipresent, powerful force that is in fact, of course, everlasting, but that is not sort of pinned down specifically to Christianity, certainly not pinned down by gender.
Yeah. Who do you want to read your work?
I want Black people to read my work. I really want Indigenous people to read my work, because I think also that there's a lot in here about land. Bonaparte is, it's land that that the ancestors, so all the people in the book are black, and so it's land that their ancestors were brought to, of course, as enslaved people, and land that they stayed on, kind of miraculously. You heard the origin myth, while the masters just up and die, so there they are, like independent in the middle of like the slave years in the South. So it's a little mythological, but one of the things that they are very well aware of, and that comes up in the book, is that they'll say over and over, they're aware that they're like stewards, or at least they're trying to navigate their relationship to the land, because they're like, well, this is the only home that we have, and so we preserve it and we keep it and we want to leave it for our children, and it has allowed us to be safe and to have some degree of freedom, but we're very well aware that this isn't our land, right? Like, it's native land, it's stolen land, and so there's a conversation, which I don't know the answer to, around land, I think, and what it means to try to make a home in a place where maybe it's just sort of, you're kind of in this system of evils begetting evils, right? Like, the first evil is that is the displacement and murder of indigenous people, but then the second evil is slavery, like if we were to date them or something, you know what I mean? But then what do you do, right? Like, you're left to make choices about where you can be and where you can live that are always compromised because of the first compromise. And so that's also like who I think about a lot. And then after that, I think just sort of, I think a lot about particularly parents, because I think it's beyond all of its, and the way I'm talking about this, it sort of sounds as though this book is just entirely like the most political thing, like a pamphlet. It's not. Like, it's very much, I don't sort of write from up here down to here. I write down here up to here. So all of this has to be embedded inside characters who are moving. Like, that's the first priority. And I think one of the things here is that these folks are, it's also a book about a fractured family, right? That's fractured by geography and by circumstance, and certainly by history and economics, but also by their own proclivities and the stupid stuff that they did and the mistakes that they make.
Also, like, they like to have sex.
They really do. Yeah, people really enjoy having
I don't want anybody to get the wrong
sex in this book.
Even the old lady is like, "Why can't I have more sex?"
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, old ladies are mourning the
loss
fact
of-
that there's no one to
loss
have
of-
sex
yeah.
with. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to do a lightning round. I feel like we're closing it. Andy, what's our time like? Okay, good. Lightning round.
Lightning round.
All right. Don't think about it.
Okay.
Just answer.
Okay.
Moby Dick or Middlemarch?
Moby Dick.
Soft pretzels or water ice? You can only eat one for the rest of your life.
Rest of my life.
Yeah, rest of your life. Soft pretzels or water ice?
Soft pretzels.
Okay. South Street or Rittenhouse Square?
Rittenhouse Square.
East Mount Airy or West Mount Airy?
Ooh. See, that's a political question. And
It's a lightning round.
Oh, West.
Boo! No, I'm just kidding. I don't even. Okay, so now to save your life, you either have to double dutch or roller skate.
Roller skate.
Central or Girls High?
Girls High.
I knew what you were going to say, but I just had to ask anyway. All right. I think, yeah. Do you have any other burning things you
No,
want to
I don't.
tell the people?
I do not have burning.
Oh,
things. I
somebody
have
is going to
questions.
ask you this. They're going to say, who are your favorite writers and books? So I already did it for them.
Jesus, that's so hard.
I know, and you're going to
so
say
impossible.
that. But yeah.
It's so impossible.
Okay, what's one book that you really like and you think everybody should read?
Okay, I'll give you two.
Okay.
One is Louise Erdrich's Plague of Doves.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, all the
And-
Louise Erdrich.
All the Louise Erdrich.
Louise
I'm like
Erdrich.
a Louise Erdrich super, like, obsessive super fan.
Yeah.
And also, out of left field a little bit, Catherine Dunn's Geek Love, which I'm reading
Oh,
again
yeah.
now. If you don't know this book, it is a singular phenomenon of a
Yeah.
novel. Like, it is unprecedented.
Yeah.
in
No,
the
it was one of
universe.
those things that came and was a big deal and
Yeah.
then kind of really went away. But
Yeah, and I
it's
don't
good.
know why, because it is like ever fresh and always like,
Yeah.
how? It's one of those books that you're just like, how did she do this?
Yeah. No, it's good.
I just wanted to know, how did teaching affect your writing of your second novel? Because you weren't teaching during the time that you wrote your first one, right?
It's a sort of double-edged sword. So on the one hand, I learned a lot from my students, and I learned a lot through talking about writing with my students. You know, I've been blessed to have these like genius students, you know. So the conversations that we had to have about our work had to be like way up here. Like I had to bring my A game every week, you know, which means I learned a lot. The hard thing though is I had to bring my A game every week, which means that like the part of my brain that maybe I need to use for writing is sort of in teaching mode. And also, I mean, I teach writing and also literature, and so when I'm teaching literature, it's super nourishing. Teaching writing is different, right? It's even though the level, or maybe because the level of many of my students is really high, you know, what we're doing is people bring work into class, and we think about what that thing is and what that student wants to make and what the obstacles are to it becoming the thing that that student wants it to be, which means that in order to do that and for me to guide a discussion about it, I am essentially at home for a week, like disassembling that work into its parts so that I can figure out what it wants to do and then figure out how we could rebuild it to the shape of what the student wants. That, of course, is really not the sort of thing that you want when you're trying to generate work, right? Like you don't want to be in like super editor dissemble mode. Like it does not help you. So it's double-edged. On the one hand, inspiring, learn so much. On the other hand, I can't necessarily do them at the same time, actually.
Hi.
Hello.
I loved 12 Tribes of Hattie.
Thank you.
I've read it like 4 times.
Thank you.
I don't know if it's possible to ask 2 questions. One's kind of easy or maybe easy, and one may not be.
I think it's fine to ask
Okay.
two questions.
What's the significance of the color orange?
Oh, that doesn't. I just like orange.
Just like orange. Okay, cool. So that was quick. How do you think setting your books in Philadelphia, or what do you think setting your books in Philadelphia brings to the characters or to the story? Because I think about, when I discovered your first novel, I think about Toni Morrison and how she sets a lot of things in Ohio. Mm-hmm. And I really appreciate it as a Philadelphian, it being set, or pieces of it being in Philadelphia. So do you think that Philadelphia adds something to the novels or to the people in the novels?
I mean, I don't even know if I would say it's a question of adding something. Like, I think that they are just like organic to Philadelphia, right? Like, I don't think that they could take place somewhere else. You know what I mean? Like, it's so integral that there would be a different novel with different people with different everything if they were set somewhere else. That said, I do think, you know, I left Philadelphia. Well, the first time I left, I was 18, and then I came back for a little while, and then I left again when I was 22, which, you know, was of course only 5 or 6 years ago. But y'all see now, y'all wasn't supposed to laugh. Anyhow, but so I until very recently, my mom was here, and I would come back like very, very frequently, but the point I'm trying to make, I guess, is in some ways like the Philadelphia that I write about is a Philadelphia of the mind. I'm stealing a concept from Salman Rushdie, who wrote an incredible essay called Imaginary Homelands about immigrating, and he talked about leaving home and then setting these novels in Pakistan and things like that, but that the place he was writing is not a place that exists anymore. It's in his mind, right? And it's these fragments that are pieced together, but that become very powerful because they're fragments. And I think that there's something analogous to that in the way that I think about Philadelphia, right? Like the Philadelphia of my teenage and sort of tween years of the 1980s, of course, doesn't exist at all in any way, shape, or form anymore. But it is the Philadelphia that is sort of the most resonant and the most deeply in my imagination, along with a Philadelphia that I never experienced at all. You know, my aunt's Philadelphia, she's sitting behind you, and my mother's Philadelphia, which is a Philadelphia of the 30s and 40s and 50s, which I didn't live in, but that was so much of part of the ether of my growing up, and the spirit of those people that it also was sort of with me in very intense ways.
I don't have a question, but I have a comment. On behalf of the Alumni Association of the Philadelphia High School for Girls, we want to say thank you for making time for us to do the author talk in September as you were on your quest to promote your new book. And we have a little something for you that we'd like to present to you.
Oh my goodness! I will come and get it afterwards. No, I want to hug her, so I'll come get it afterwards because I want to actually.
We say thank you. I was your co-moderator for that
I know.
event, and we are so proud of you. If you remember our school song, our alma mater, where it says, "To her we laurels bring," and we want to thank you for bringing the laurels back to our alma mater.
Oh, thank you. You know, the Girls' Side thing is no joke. Thank you. Thank you.
I was just interested in what you were saying about how you had with. Okay, is it working? It wasn't working for a sec. Talking to characters and sound. I was wondering, like, do you, and your reading was your cadence was so beautiful, your presentation was so musical. I wonder if you speak to yourself actually while you write, or if you use sound in any way to produce your work.
Yes, I speak to myself actually a lot in general, which I should not admit probably. But just half jokes aside, I read aloud a lot, and it sort of, and when I read aloud, I'm checking for sound, because I also find that not always. Well, if you read aloud, it's like your voice will catch really, like when there's a wrong note. It's like music. Like you instantly all of us do, right? Like a wrong note in anything, like we all, something in you just recognizes it. And the same thing for me tends to happen with, and I think it's what I tell my students with sentences, right? Like if there was a wrong word, the rhythm is wrong, like my voice will catch quite literally, and then I'm like, okay, well, I've got to deal with that. And sometimes that's helping just on the level of sound and like sort of the musicality and the rhythm of the sentences. But sometimes it also helps enormously with meaning, right? Like, because the other thing is that, that wrong word might might not sound great, but it also might not be the right word at all. And so the whole sort of sense of the sentence is also really intertwined with the sound of the sentences, if that makes any sense. And all these high school friends that are there, they're sitting over there. They, I thought for a long time in my earlier and younger life that I was going to be a poet. We should all be grateful that I didn't do that, because it would be really just a lot of mediocre poetry. But I will say that in terms of sort of training, it was like essential. I mean, it teaches you everything about like economy of language, about rhythm, about sound, a sort of respect for the materials that you build with, you know what I mean? Like, so a lot of time of my life spent writing bad poetry, but reading a lot of good poetry, which I still do, and so that also has been really, really important.
Did you read this entire book aloud? I do that now when I have
a
a final
lot,
draft.
right?
Did you? No, but the whole.
I didn't read the whole thing because I was just
Okay.
like, it's a little bit. It's like sometimes it's just like, oh, that's discouraging. But but many sections.
Yeah.
Many
No, of course.
sections.
Yeah.
You read a whole book. Will you read the whole thing?
Now at the end of the whole thing.
Like you'll go like page 1 to page whatever.
At the end of the whole thing.
That's impressive. Like the end, like it's edited, or the end, like you're
Like
about to hand it in?
No, the end, like it's about to go to the copy.
Oh, it's
editors.
going.
It's over.
Ooh.
Like, yeah.
You're a
like,
brave
creative.
woman. I was like, I can't face this.
Oh,
I'm just
wow.
gonna hope for the best.
It takes forever.
A coward. Yeah. Also, that must take
Yeah,
quite
it
a
takes
lot of
forever.
time.
But I mean, my books are a lot shorter than this, though.
This book is annoyingly long. I didn't want to. I was like, it's going to be 225 pages.
which is sort of arbitrary, but that's what I
Yeah.
decided,
Oh, okay.
and was not true.
Are you working on the third book yet?
Oh,
I
God,
hope.
no.
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 I just didn't want to wait another 10 years.
God bless you and thank you, but I don't. No, not at the moment. Let's say. I hope it won't be 10 years. That's too long. I think. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Gina.
Hey,
How
Gina.
about How about some short stories? Maybe that would be better.
I'm not. It's
You
just
read
it's
short stories.
that is not my gift.
Yeah.
That is not my gift. It's just I read a lot of them. I teach them, but it's my I try to write a short story and it just ends up being like, but what about the uncle? And what about 10 years before that? And what about their grandmother? And what do you suppose happened to that dog? So, and it just balloons into this like unwieldy thing. So that is not compression, as you can tell from my answers. Compression is not my gift.
One other question was some of the imagery was like so beautiful and on such like a mythical scale. But I was wondering, like with the starlings and the murmuration, and then the image of the mother, so inaccessible and high, like a mountain, lonely mountain. Do you collect images or dreams? Do you like write down things like that touch you? To use as a collage almost, or like a running collection of images that mean something to you?
I wish that I did. I aspire to be one of those people that like wakes up when they have a weird dream and then they write it down. I've never done that. If I wake up from a dream, I'm like, and then I just try to go back to sleep. That said, I don't know. So no, I don't do that. And I don't, I have writer friends. Do you have a notebook? Do you wander around with a notebook that you're
No.
writing? Yeah, no, I wish I was one of those people.
I'm like, I'll totally remember that.
And you never do, right? So same. So I don't have a notebook. So mostly I forget probably a good 90% of the ideas I've ever had. But that said, strange things happen that I think I'm sometimes totally not completely aware of. So a couple of days ago, I was looking for, I got this book that I was needed for something totally unrelated to this book. Probably it was a teaching thing. I don't remember why I was looking for it. So I get the book off the bookshelf and I was looking for a specific section. So I'm like flipping through looking for the section and I see this kind of like bright fuchsia Post-it note. And I always use the bright ones because my brain is like a little like weird bird. So like I need like shiny, colorful things to attract my attention. So I'm looking through this bright fuchsia note, and all it's like in a book that I haven't opened in probably 5 or 6 years, and all it says in capital letters, underlined with 3 exclamation points, is guns. And I was just like, what? Like, what am I doing? So I think, and there are actually like quite clearly that was a note that was to myself about something in this book. Like this book is about, not about, but I mean certainly there's a lot of like state violence and there's police violence and there's people having both offensive and defensive violence, and so there are guns in this book. And so I guess I was trying, I don't know what that was, because it was no elaboration. It just said guns with like a lot, So like that's not an image, but I think that I do find after when I'm done writing a thing, this sort of weird like snail trail of like of the little remnants of my brain functionings, you know what I mean, with no context, which are more alarming than comforting actually, but in any case, I mean, it doesn't really answer your question, but it does say that there are these little bits that get kind of left around that you find later and are confused by or something.
All right. Well, thank you.
Oh my gosh, who knows what to do?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. Are you signing books?
I am. I think I'm signing downstairs. So
Yeah.
if you don't have a copy, you can get one.
Yeah.
Some of them may have signatures in them already, but I also am happy to personalize books. And certainly, stop by the book table, buy a book. I guess that's where I'm going. I'm assuming that's where I'm going. And that is where I'm going. And we can have a chat, and I can sign your book. Thank you so much for
Thank you.
coming, everybody. Thank you,
you.
Asali, for
Thank
being
you.
amazing.
Yeah.